Hello there, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep, where the noise of the day is allowed to fade, where thoughts are permitted to slow, and where the mind is free to drift somewhere far, far away from the small worries that followed you here. Tonight, we are going to travel to a place you have seen almost every night of your life, a place that has watched over sleeping cities and quiet oceans, over deserts and forests, over every person who has ever closed their eyes beneath the open sky. And yet, for all its familiarity, it remains one of the strangest and most secretive worlds we know. Tonight, we are going to the moon. Not to conquer it, not to plant flags or claim ground, simply to travel across it slowly, gently, the way you might wander through an old and silent cathedral, letting your eyes move over every worn stone and shadowed corner. We are going to trace its long and quiet history, from the moment of its violent birth to the still gray world it has become. And we are going to do it together, unhurried, in no rush to arrive anywhere at all. But before we begin drifting upward, away from the earth and into the dark, I would love to know something. Where are you listening from tonight? Somewhere warm, perhaps, with a window open to the night. Somewhere cold, wrapped beneath heavy blankets. A city apartment, a quiet house, a long train journey through the dark. Wherever you are, the same moon that we are about to explore has almost certainly passed over you at some point, silver and patient, whether you noticed it or not. If this kind of slow, quiet curiosity is something you enjoy, I would be deeply grateful if you would take a moment to like this video, or to subscribe to Documentary for Sleep. It genuinely helps this small and peaceful corner of the internet reach other people who might be lying awake tonight, searching for something calm to carry them into sleep. That is all. No more interruptions from here. Just settle in, let your breathing slow, and let me carry you upward. Because the story we are telling tonight began long before there were eyes to witness it. It began in fire, and in chaos, and in a collision so vast that it reshaped two worlds at once. Let us begin at the beginning. Long ago, before there was a moon at all, there was only the young earth, and it was not the gentle blue world you know. It was a place of molten rock and restless heat, still forming, still gathering itself together out of the leftover rubble of the newborn sun. The sky was thick and dark, the ground glowed, and the whole planet was scarred and battered by the endless rain of stone and metal that filled the early solar system in that distant age when everything was still finding its place. Into this violent nursery came another world. We call it Theia, after a figure from the old myths, the mother of the moon goddess, though of course it had no name of its own and no one to name it. Theia was roughly the size of the planet Mars, a wandering body caught in the same slow dance of gravity as the young Earth, and for reasons written into the mathematics of orbits and time, the two were destined to meet. They did not meet gently. Around 4.5 billion years ago, Theia struck the Earth. Not a glancing blow, but a collision of almost unimaginable force, two planets meeting at speeds that turned solid rock to vapor in an instant. The impact was so enormous that it very nearly destroyed the Earth entirely. Much of Theia was swallowed, merging into our planet's molten heart. But an immense plume of shattered rock and glowing debris was flung outward into space, thrown into a ring that circled the wounded Earth like a halo of fire and dust. And it is from that ring, that glowing wreckage of a lost world, that the moon was born. Try to imagine it. A disk of molten fragments spinning around the Earth, each piece pulled by gravity toward its neighbors. Over time, perhaps only a few thousand years, which is nothing at all in the long life of a planet. Those fragments began to gather. They collided, merged, and grew. Small clumps became larger ones. larger ones swept up the smaller ones around them. And slowly, out of the debris of catastrophe, a new world took shape. Round, glowing, and utterly new. There is a beautiful and surprising detail hidden in this story, one that has puzzled scientists for many years. When we study the rocks of the moon, brought back by astronauts and studied in laboratories on Earth, we find that they are strangely, remarkably similar to the rocks of our own planet, almost as though the moon were made of the very same material as the Earth. And this is a puzzle, because if the moon formed mostly from Theia, we might expect it to look different, to carry the distinct chemical fingerprint of that other world. Instead, it looks like a piece of the Earth itself. Scientists have offered many ideas to explain this. Perhaps the collision was so violent, so complete, that the material of the Earth and the material of Theia were mixed together thoroughly, blended into a single molten cloud before the moon condensed out of it, so that the moon inherited an even share of both. Some have imagined that after the impact, the Earth was not a solid ball at all, but a vast, spinning cloud of vaporized rock. A glowing donut-shaped haze so hot and so wild that it barely resembled a planet. From within that seething cloud, they suggest, the moon slowly gathered, drawing together out of the same swirling material that would eventually settle back down to form the Earth. Whether it happened in exactly this way, we may never know for certain. The event was so long ago, so violent, and so complete, that it erased much of its own evidence. But the deep kinship between the Earth and the moon remains, written into their very stones. They are, in the most literal sense, made of the same stuff. Born together. Siblings from a single act of fire. The moon that formed was not the pale and distant companion you see tonight. It was born close to the Earth, far closer than it is now, looming enormous and red in a sky that had no one to look at it. It glowed with the heat of its own creation. And where you might picture the moon as cold and lifeless, in those first ages it was anything but still. It was a world in the middle of becoming, and its surface was an ocean of liquid rock. That ocean of molten stone is one of the great secrets written into the moon's face, even now. For as that magma slowly cooled, it did something remarkable. It separated. The heavier minerals sank downward, drifting toward the center, while the lighter ones floated upward like foam rising on the surface of a pond. And those light minerals, cooling and hardening at the top, formed the moon's first crust. A pale, bright crust of a rock we call anorthosite, so light in color that it still forms the bright highlands you can see with your own eyes when you look up at the full moon and notice the paler regions gleaming there. Between the sinking heavy minerals and the floating light ones, there was left behind a strange residue, a last drag of the magma ocean rich in unusual elements, the ones that did not fit neatly into the forming crystals. Scientists have given this material a curious little name, made from the chemical symbols of the elements it contains. But you do not need to remember any of that. What matters is simply that the moon, as it cooled, sorted itself into layers, like a slow and patient act of settling, and that the pale crust that floated to the top is still there today, forming the oldest landscapes on its surface. So already, in these first quiet moments after its birth, the moon was writing its story onto its own face. The bright highlands you see are among the oldest landscapes anywhere in the solar system. They are the cooled skin of a magma ocean that hardened more than 4 billion years ago, and they have barely changed since. When you look at those pale reaches, you are looking at some of the most ancient rock that human eyes have ever seen. A memory of the moon's fiery beginning, preserved in stone, held out toward us across an unimaginable span of time. And this is the first of many things that makes the moon so strange, so worthy of our quiet attention tonight. It is a world that almost never forgets. On Earth, the surface is endlessly rewritten. Rain wears the mountains down. Rivers carve new valleys. The great plates of the crust shift and dive and rise, swallowing old landscapes and raising new ones. Wind erases footprints within moments, and life itself covers everything in green. Our planet is restless, always renewing itself, always forgetting. The moon does none of this. The moon remembers. And so, as we drift closer to that gray and silent surface, we are not just looking at a rock in the sky. We are opening a book. A book whose pages are craters and plains and mountains, each one a record of something that happened long ago and was never wiped away. To read that book is to read the history not only of the moon, but of the Earth, and of the entire solar system in its violent youth. Everything that happened to the young Earth happened to the young moon as well. But the Earth hid its scars, and the moon kept them, out in the open, honest and clear, waiting for someone to finally look up and read them. But to read that book, we must first understand how the moon came to hold so still, because the moon we see tonight is a world that turned its face toward us and never once looked away. There is something you may have wondered about, perhaps as a child, perhaps only in passing. Why does the moon always show us the same face? Night after night, year after year, the same features look down upon us, the same pale seas, the same shadowed patterns that different cultures have seen as a rabbit, or a face, or a woman carrying sticks, or a great toad. In all the thousands of years that humans have watched the sky, no one standing on the earth has ever seen the far side of the moon with their own eyes. This is not a coincidence, and it is not a trick. It is the result of a slow and patient force that has been at work for billions of years. A force called tidal locking. When the moon was young and close, it spun much faster than it does now, and the Earth's gravity pulled unevenly upon it, stretching it slightly, raising bulges in its still soft body. As the moon turned, those bulges were dragged and flexed. And all that flexing created friction deep within the moon. Friction that gently, endlessly, acted as a brake upon its spin. Over millions of years, the moon's rotation slowed and slowed, until at last it settled into a perfect rhythm. Now the moon turns exactly once on its axis for every single time it circles the Earth. It does rotate. It has never stopped rotating, but because those two motions are locked together in perfect step, one face remains forever turned toward us, and one face forever turned away. Think of a dancer moving in a slow circle around a partner, always keeping their eyes fixed upon that partner's face. To an outside observer, the dancer is turning fully around, but to the partner at the center, the dancer never looks away. That is the moon and the Earth, two bodies locked in a dance so old and so steady that the steps have become fixed, and one always faces the other. Now, there is a gentle exception to this, a small and lovely detail that means we actually see a little more than half of the moon over time. The moon's path around the Earth is not a perfect circle, but a slight oval, and its speed along that path is not quite even. It hurries a little when it is closer to us, and slows a little when it is farther away. But its spin remains perfectly steady, and so, now and then, its face seems to rock very slightly from side to side, and to nod ever so gently up and down, as though the moon were slowly shaking and nodding its head across the weeks. This slow rocking is called libration, and because of it, we are able to peek just a little way around the edges of the moon, catching glimpses of terrain that would otherwise be hidden. Over time, these small glimpses add up, so that in total, we can see rather more than half of the moon's surface from the Earth, though never all at once, and never quite the hidden far side itself. It is as if the moon, forever loyal, forever facing us, cannot help but let a sliver of its secret half show, first on one side, then on the other, in a slow and patient turning that takes weeks to complete. The face we know so well, the near side, is a face we have studied for as long as we have had eyes to look upward. Every mountain and plain upon it has been named. Sailors once used its light to find their way. Poets wrote of it. Lovers pointed at it. Children reached for it. And astronomers, long before any spacecraft existed, mapped its features carefully through their telescopes, giving names to the great dark plains they saw, believing them at first to be true oceans of water. They were not oceans, of course, but the names remained. And so, even now, we speak of the Sea of Tranquility, the Ocean of Storms, the Sea of Serenity, the Sea of Rains, the Bay of Rainbows, the Lake of Dreams, the Marsh of Sleep. Names full of longing and imagination, given to a world where not a single drop of liquid water has ever pooled upon the surface. They are seas of stone, not water. But there is something quietly beautiful in the fact that when the first astronomers looked up and saw those dark, smooth plains, their instinct was to call them oceans. To see, in that silent gray world, a reflection of the seas of home. And there is something fitting, too, that among all those names, someone once chose to call a small dark patch the Marsh of Sleep, and another the Lake of Dreams, as if they somehow knew that this quiet world would forever be tied, in the human heart, to rest, and to the drifting places the mind goes in the night. There is also a soft and haunting sight you may have noticed yourself, on a clear evening when the moon is a thin crescent, only a few days old. Sometimes, cradled within the bright arms of that crescent, you can faintly see the rest of the moon, the part that should be dark, glowing very dimly, a ghostly gray circle held within the bright curve. This is not moonlight. This is earthlight. It is sunlight that has struck the earth, bounced off our oceans and clouds and ice, traveled all the way to the moon, and softly illuminated its darkened face before returning once more to your eyes. The old poets called it the old moon in the new moon's arms. It is our planet, gently lighting up its ancient companion across the emptiness of space. When you see it, you are watching the earth and the moon quietly reflecting light back and forth to one another. The way two old friends might exchange a glance across a room without needing to say a word. But let us stay a while with the changing face of the moon, for it does not always look the same. It waxes and it wanes, growing and shrinking through the weeks, in the endless cycle that has measured out human time since before there was writing to record it. The moon shines not with its own light, but with the light of the sun. It is a dark, gray ball of rock, and everything we see of it, all its silver glow, is simply sunlight falling upon its surface and reflecting back to us. And as the moon travels around the earth, the angle between the moon, the earth, and the sun is always changing. This is what gives us the phases. When the moon lies between the earth and the sun, its lit face is turned entirely away from us, and its dark side faces the earth. We call this the new moon, and at this time the moon is nearly invisible, lost in the glare of the daytime sky. Then, night by night, as the moon moves along its path, a thin sliver of its sunlit side begins to appear, a delicate crescent low in the evening sky. The crescent grows, night after night, into a half moon, which astronomers call the first quarter, because the moon has completed a quarter of its journey around us. It grows further still, swelling into a rounded, bulging shape called the gibbous moon, until at last, when the moon lies on the opposite side of the earth from the sun, its entire face is lit, and it rises full and round and bright, flooding the night with silver. And then, having reached its fullness, the moon begins to shrink again. The gibbous moon wanes. It returns to a half, the last quarter now. The half slims once more to a crescent, thinner and thinner, until it vanishes back into the new moon, and the whole slow cycle begins again. From new moon to new moon takes a little over 29 days, a rhythm so steady and so ancient that nearly every early people on Earth used it to build their calendars and mark the passing of their months. The very word month comes from the moon. To measure a month was, once, simply to count the turning of the moon through its phases. Think of how many human beings, across all of history, have watched this same slow cycle. Farmers who planned their planting by it, sailors who timed their voyages by the tides it commanded, travelers who waited for the full moon to light their way along dark roads, whole festivals and holy days in cultures all across the earth set by the phase of the moon still observed today. This quiet cycle, this waxing and waning that you can watch for yourself over the course of any month, is one of the oldest clocks in all of human experience. And it is nothing more than the moon, turning steadily around the earth, showing us now more, now less, of its sunlit face, as it has done, faithfully, for billions of years, and will do for billions more. And every so often, in this long, slow dance of the sun, the earth, and the moon, the three of them fall into a rare and perfect line, and something extraordinary happens in our sky. An eclipse. There are two kinds, and they are opposites of one another, mirror images across the cycle of the month. The first is the lunar eclipse, and it can only happen at the full moon, when the moon stands on the far side of the earth from the sun. On most full moons, the moon rides a little above or a little below the exact line and passes by without incident. But now and then, everything aligns just so, and the moon glides directly into the long shadow that the earth casts out behind itself into space. And as it enters that shadow, the bright full moon begins, slowly, to dim. You might expect that the moon, sliding into the earth's shadow, would simply go dark and vanish, but it does not. Instead, something far more beautiful occurs. It turns red, a deep, dusky, coppery red, glowing softly in the darkened sky. And the reason is one of the loveliest facts in all of astronomy. Even though the earth is blocking the direct light of the sun, a little sunlight still bends around the very edge of our planet, passing through the thin ring of our atmosphere that circles the earth. And as that light passes through all our air, the same air that turns our sunrises and our sunsets to fire, it is reddened, filtered down to its deep warm hues, and then bent gently inward to fall upon the face of the moon. So the red light that bathes the eclipsed moon is, quite literally, the combined light of every sunrise and every sunset happening on Earth at that moment, all at once, gathered up and cast softly across the lunar surface. When you look up at a red eclipsed moon, you are seeing our world's own dawn and dusk projected onto our ancient companion. If you were standing on the moon during such an eclipse, and you looked up, you would see the Earth as a dark disk ringed by a thin, glowing band of red, the light of all our skies burning around its edge in a perfect circle. It is no wonder that people across the ages have looked up at the blood-red moon with awe, and sometimes with fear, and woven it into their myths and their prophecies. It is a rare and haunting sight, gentle and slow, unfolding over hours, harming nothing, simply the quiet passage of the moon through the shadow of the world. The other kind of eclipse is the opposite, and it can only happen at the new moon, when the moon passes between the earth and the sun. This is the solar eclipse, and it is one of the most astonishing spectacles that nature offers anywhere. For on those rare occasions when the alignment is perfect, the moon slides directly across the face of the sun and blots it out entirely. And for a few short minutes, in the middle of the day, along a narrow path across the earth, the sky goes dark. The stars come out. The air grows cold. The birds fall silent, confused into thinking that night has come. And around the black disk of the hidden sun, a pale and ghostly halo appears. The sun's faint outer atmosphere, its corona, streaming out into the dark, normally invisible, revealed only in these fleeting moments of totality. And here we return to that astonishing coincidence, the one we touched upon before. The sun is enormous, vastly larger than the moon, 400 times its width. But the sun is also almost exactly 400 times farther away. And so, by a coincidence that has no deeper reason behind it, no law of nature that requires it, the sun and the moon appear in our sky at very nearly the same size. This is why the moon can cover the sun so perfectly during an eclipse, neither too large nor too small, but just right, hiding the blazing disk while leaving the delicate corona free to shine. There is no reason it should be so. It is simply a gift of our particular moment in time, for as the moon slowly drifts away from us across the ages, this perfect fit will eventually be lost, and the total eclipses will come to an end. We, of all the generations that have ever lived or ever will, happen to be here in the window when the fit is perfect. It is a small and beautiful piece of cosmic good fortune, and it will not last forever. Now let us turn our attention to the thing no eye on earth has ever truly seen: the hidden face, the far side of the moon. For all of human history, the far side of the moon was a complete mystery. It was, quite literally, the very definition of the unknown, a place forever out of sight, forever beyond reach. People imagined all manner of things might be hidden there. Some wondered if it might be different in some fundamental way, if it might hold secrets that the near side did not. And in a sense, they were right, though not in the ways they imagined. The far side remained unseen until the autumn of 1959, when a small spacecraft named Luna 3 swung around the moon and, for the first time in the history of the world, turned its camera toward that hidden hemisphere. The images it sent back were blurry and faint, ghostly gray shapes emerging from the dark, grainy, and imperfect. But they were among the most extraordinary pictures ever taken, because they revealed something no human being had ever laid eyes upon. A whole half of a world, glimpsed for the very first time. A face that the moon had kept turned away from every person who had ever lived. From the first firelit gatherings of our distant ancestors to the great cities of the modern age, was finally, quietly, revealed. And what those first faint images began to hint at, and what later missions confirmed in stunning detail, was that the far side of the moon is genuinely, deeply different from the side we know. The near side, the face that watches over us, is marked by those great dark plains, the seas of frozen lava that we spoke of. They cover much of its surface, giving it that familiar, patterned look, the look that generations of children have gazed at and imagined into faces and animals. But the far side has almost none of them. Instead, it is a rugged, ancient, endlessly cratered landscape, pale and battered, without the smooth, dark seas that define the face we know. If the near side is a portrait, softened by shadow and plane, the far side is raw stone, cratered upon cratered, a surface that seems to record every blow it has ever received without mercy or relief. Why should the two halves of a single world be so different? This is one of the moon's quiet, enduring mysteries, and scientists have puzzled over it for decades. Part of the answer seems to lie in the crust itself. The crust on the far side is noticeably thicker than the crust on the near side. And because the dark seas were formed when molten rock rose from deep within the moon and flooded across the surface, that rising lava had a far harder time breaking through the thick far side crust than it did through the thinner near side crust. On the near side, the lava welled up and spread into vast plains. On the far side, it was mostly held back, sealed beneath the thick stone. And so the far side kept its ancient, heavily cratered face, while the near side was smoothed and darkened by floods of lava that the far side never fully received. But why the crust should be thicker on one side than the other is itself a puzzle, and here the theories grow more speculative and more wonderful. Some scientists have suggested that in the very earliest days, when the young Earth still glowed with the heat of its formation, the Earth-facing side of the moon stayed warmer because it was bathed in the heat radiating from the nearby molten Earth. The far side turned away, cooled faster, and formed a thicker crust. Others have wondered whether the moon might once have had a second, smaller companion, a little sister moon, that eventually drifted into it and merged with it in a slow, gentle collision, plastering extra material onto one side and leaving it thicker than the other. We do not know which of these stories, if any, is true, but there is something marvelous in the idea that the two faces of the moon, so different from one another, may be the result of events so ancient and so strange that we can only guess at them. There is a strange poetry in it, whatever the cause. The face the moon turns toward us is the gentler one, the one softened by those dark seas. The face it hides is the harsher one, older and rougher and more scarred. As though the moon, in its long dance with the earth, chose to show us its calmer aspect and to keep its wilder one turned away. When the far side was finally mapped, the features upon it needed names, and so the map makers gave them. Many of the craters on the far side bear the names of scientists and thinkers and pioneers, chosen to honor those who had helped humanity understand the heavens. And so, hidden on the side of the moon that no earthly eye can ever see, there are craters that carry the names of great minds from across the world, quietly commemorated on a surface that will never be visible from the ground of the planet those minds belong to. It is a curious kind of monument, a tribute placed where it can never be seen by the people it honors, but which endures, nonetheless, in the silence of the far side, for as long as the moon itself shall last. And upon that hidden far side lies one of the most remarkable features anywhere on the moon, a scar so enormous that it took the eyes of orbiting spacecraft to truly comprehend it. It is called the South Pole, Aitken Basin, and it is one of the largest and oldest impact craters in the entire solar system. It stretches across an immense portion of the far side, a wound thousands of kilometers wide and many kilometers deep, carved when some ancient body struck the young moon with staggering force. The blow was so violent that it may have punched down toward the moon's very mantle, dredging up material from deep within. It is so vast that if you stood within it, you would never sense its edges. You would simply be walking across a plain, unaware that you were standing at the bottom of one of the greatest scars in the entire solar system. That basin has been there for billions of years, patiently holding its shape, waiting in the dark on the side of the moon that the Earth can never see. Only in recent decades have spacecraft mapped it in detail, and only very recently has any craft managed to land within its reaches. For nearly all of history, it was completely unknown to us, a colossal feature larger than entire continents, hidden in plain sight, simply because it faced the wrong way. This is worth sitting with as you drift toward sleep. The idea that something so vast could remain unknown for so long, not because it was small or faint, but simply because of where it faced. It reminds us how much of the universe is hidden not by distance, but by angle, by circumstance, by the quiet accidents of motion and time. And it reminds us that even the most familiar things, like the moon that is hung above every night of your life, can hold entire hidden halves that we are only beginning to know. Let us now return to those dark seas, the Maria, and learn how they came to be, for they are the calm heart of the near side, and their story is a story of fire cooled into stillness. When you look up at the full moon, the dark patches you see, those gray-blue shadows across its bright face, are the Maria. The word comes from the Latin for seas, given to them by early astronomers who mistook their smooth darkness for water. In truth, they are vast plains of solidified lava, some of the flattest and most level terrain to be found anywhere in the solar system. Their story begins after the great bombardment of the moon's youth, in an era when enormous impacts still occasionally struck the surface. When a truly gigantic asteroid or comet crashed into the moon, it did not simply leave a crater. It punched an immense basin deep into the crust, a wound so large that it fractured the rock far below. And beneath that fractured crust, in the still warm interior of the young moon, there was molten rock. Dark, heavy, iron-rich basalt, the same kind of rock that flows from volcanoes on Earth and forms the floors of our own oceans. Over long ages, that molten basalt found its way upward through the cracks left by the ancient impacts. It welled up slowly, not in violent, explosive eruptions, but in vast, quiet floods. It spread out across the floors of the great basins, layer upon layer, cooling and darkening as it went. This did not happen all at once. It happened over hundreds of millions of years, one gentle flood of lava after another, gradually filling the basins and smoothing them into the dark, level seas we see today. Some of those floods were so slow and so fluid that they spread out into perfectly flat sheets, level as still water, before hardening forever into stone. And then, roughly 3 billion years ago, give or take, the great flooding largely ceased. The moon's interior had cooled enough that the lava no longer rose so freely. The seas of stone hardened for the final time and fell silent, and they have remained silent ever since. For 3 billion years, those plains have lain undisturbed, save for the slow, patient rain of small impacts and the imperceptible drift of dust. When you look at the Sea of Tranquility tonight, you are looking at a lava plain that finished forming before the first complex life appeared in Earth's oceans. It has been still and gray and quiet for longer than there have been fish upon the earth. There is a profound calm in that thought. On our own world, 3 billion years is an unimaginable stretch of time, an eternity of shifting continents and rising mountains and the endless churn of life and death and rebirth. On the moon, 3 billion years is simply how long a plane has been resting. Nothing has moved it. Nothing has worn it away. The footprints of the astronauts who walked upon the Sea of Tranquility in the summer of 1969 are still there tonight, pressed into that ancient dust, and they may remain there, unchanged, for millions of years to come. Because the moon has no wind, it has no rain, it has no rivers, no oceans, no weather of any kind. It has only the faintest whisper of an atmosphere, so thin that it barely deserves the name, a scattering of individual atoms so sparse that they almost never touch one another. And with no air and no water to wear things down, the surface of the moon changes only through the slow accumulation of impacts, one tiny strike at a time, over spans of time so vast they defeat the imagination. This is why the moon is such a perfect keeper of memory. Every mark upon it is a record. Every crater is a moment frozen in time, a collision that happened once and left its imprint forever. To walk across the Maria is to walk across a page from the deep past, one that has never been torn out, never rewritten, never lost. And within those dark seas, If you were to travel across them slowly, you would find gentle features that most people never notice. Long, winding channels called rillas, carved by ancient rivers of flowing lava, curling across the plains like the dry beds of streams that once ran with molten rock instead of water. Low, rounded ridges, called wrinkle ridges, where the cooling lava buckled and folded as it hardened, like the skin that forms upon cooling milk, gathered into long, gentle waves across the plain. Isolated hills and rounded domes, the remains of old volcanic vents, where lava once pushed up quietly from below. All of it silent now, all of it still. A landscape shaped by fire, and then abandoned by it, left to rest in the long gray quiet. The moon's volcanoes were not, for the most part, the towering, explosive mountains we picture on Earth. They were gentler things. The lava was thin and runny, and rather than building tall cones, it tended to spread out flat, or to seep upward through long cracks in the ground. In some places, though, the eruptions did throw material into the sky, and here we come to one of the loveliest discoveries ever made upon the moon. When the astronauts of the final Apollo mission explored a valley on the near side, one of them noticed something startling amid all the endless gray. A patch of color, orange soil, bright orange scattered across the gray lunar dust, as vivid and surprising as a splash of paint upon a stone floor. For a moment they wondered if it might be some sign of recent activity, something warm, something strange. But the truth was, in its own way, just as wonderful. That orange soil was made of countless tiny beads of volcanic glass, sprayed into the airless sky by a fountain of lava more than 3 billion years ago, and then frozen instantly in the cold and falling back to the surface as a fine glassy rain. Each bead was smaller than a grain of sand, a droplet of ancient fire caught and hardened in an instant, and preserved, unchanged, for over 3 billion years, until a human hand finally scooped it up. Some of those glass beads, formed in the depths of the moon and flung out in that ancient eruption, carry within them faint traces of water, locked into the glass at the moment of their making. Tiny hints that the moon, in its youth, may not have been quite so utterly dry as we long believed. Even here, in the gray stillness, there are small, bright surprises waiting, colors hidden in the dust, and the frozen memory of fountains of fire that played across the surface long before the first living thing crawled from the sea on Earth. Imagine standing there, in the middle of one of those seas of stone. The ground beneath your feet is dark and level, stretching to a horizon that is far closer than any horizon on Earth, because the moon is small and its surface curves away more sharply. Above you, the black sky holds no clouds, and the stars do not twinkle, because there is no air to make them shimmer. They simply shine, steady and cold and clear. And there, hanging in that black sky, is the Earth, blue and white and impossibly beautiful, the only colorful thing in all that gray and black, watching over you as you stand upon the plain that has waited 3 billion years for your footsteps. But we have lingered on the calm seas. Let us now turn to the violence that shaped so much of the moon's face. For if the Maria are its stillness, the craters are its scars, and there are more of them than any number the mind can hold. The moon is, above all else, a cratered world. Look at it through even a modest telescope or a good pair of binoculars on a clear night, and you will see them. Circles within circles, rings and pits and bowls of every size, scattered across the entire surface, overlapping and crowding one another until in some places there is scarcely a patch of ground that has not been struck. The moon's face is a record of an ancient and terrible rain, a rain not of water, but of stone. It is worth pausing to remember that for most of human history, no one knew these craters existed at all. To the naked eye, The moon is a smooth, glowing disk, marked only by its vague gray patterns. It was not until the year 1609, when an Italian named Galileo turned one of the first telescopes toward the night sky, that anyone saw the moon as it truly is. When Galileo looked, he was astonished. The moon, which the philosophers of his age had insisted must be a perfect, smooth, heavenly sphere, was revealed instead to be a rugged, mountainous, pitted world, with peaks that cast long shadows and valleys, and great circular pits scattered across its face. It was, in a sense, a place, a landscape, a world with mountains and plains, not so unlike the earth. That single act of looking, 4 centuries ago, quietly changed how humanity understood its place in the cosmos. The heavens were not perfect and untouchable after all. They were made of real rock, real stone, real ground that one might, perhaps, someday stand upon. To understand those craters, we must return once more to the youth of the solar system, when everything was still forming and space was crowded with debris. In those early ages, the newborn planets and moons were bombarded relentlessly by leftover fragments, asteroids and comets and shattered pieces of failed worlds, all of them careening through space, all of them capable of striking anything that lay in their path. The Earth was struck too, again and again. But the Earth, with its wind and water and shifting crust, has erased almost all evidence of that early violence. Its ancient craters have been worn away, buried, drowned, or swallowed back into the depths. The moon kept everything. Around 3.9 billion years ago, there seems to have been a particularly intense period of bombardment, a time sometimes called the Late Heavy Bombardment. During this age, an enormous number of impacts struck the moon in a relatively short span, carving many of the great basins and craters we see today. Whether this was a sudden, dramatic spike in violence, or simply the tail end of the long, steady reign that had gone before, scientists still debate. But whatever the cause, the moon received it all, and it recorded it all, and it has held on to that record ever since. When an object strikes the moon, it does not simply make a dent, the way a stone might dent soft earth. It strikes at such tremendous speed that the impact releases a burst of energy like an explosion. The ground is blasted outward and upward. Rock is thrown for great distances, falling back to form rays and ridges around the new crater. The floor of the crater may rebound, rising into a central peak, a mountain born in an instant from the shock of the collision. Frozen at the very moment it leapt upward. And around the largest impacts, the crust may ripple outward in concentric rings, like the rings that spread across a pond when a stone is dropped into still water, except that here those ripples were carved into solid rock and have remained frozen there for billions of years. Some of the moon's craters are famous, and if you know where to look, you can find them yourself. There is Tycho in the moon's southern highlands, a relatively young crater, only around 100 million years old, which is practically newborn by lunar standards. Tycho is surrounded by bright rays of ejected material that stretch for hundreds of kilometers across the surface, so bright and so extensive that around the time of the full moon you can see them with the naked eye, radiating outward like the spokes of a great pale wheel. There is Copernicus, another prominent crater with terraced walls and central peaks. A textbook example of what a great impact leaves behind. And there is the crater Plato, its floor flooded with dark lava, a smooth gray disk set into the rugged highlands like a still dark pool that will never ripple. Each of these is a moment preserved. Each one marks the instant when something from the depths of space met the moon and left its signature. And because the moon does not heal, those signatures remain, sharp and clear, in some cases looking almost as fresh as the day they were made, even after hundreds of millions or billions of years. There is something humbling in wandering, in the mind's eye, across a landscape so thoroughly marked by impact. It is a reminder of just how violent the history of the solar system has truly been, and how fortunate we are to live upon a world where that violence has been softened and hidden away. The moon shows us, plainly and honestly, what the early solar system was really like. A dangerous, chaotic place where worlds were battered and broken and remade. The Earth went through all of this too, every bit of it. But the Earth kept its scars hidden beneath green fields and blue seas. The moon wears them openly, an honest face, an unflinching record of a violent past that it has never tried to conceal. And yet, for all their violence, the craters of the moon are strangely peaceful to contemplate. They are frozen now. The rain of stone has slowed to the barest trickle. The great impacts belong to the deep past. What remains is stillness, a landscape shaped by ancient chaos but now utterly at rest. To gaze upon those craters is to see violence transformed into calm by the simple passage of an incomprehensible span of time. It is, in its way, a quiet lesson in patience. Everything that struck the moon, no matter how sudden or terrible, has long since become part of a still, unchanging landscape, resting silently beneath the black sky. But the moon is not entirely dead within. Beneath that ancient, frozen surface, there is a deeper story, and it too holds a gentle secret. For the moon still trembles, ever so faintly, from time to time. It still, in its own quiet way, moves. When the astronauts visited the moon, they did not only gather rocks and take photographs. They left instruments behind, carefully placed upon the surface to keep listening long after the travelers had gone. Among these were seismometers, delicate devices designed to feel the faintest shivers passing through the ground, the way a person might feel the distant rumble of a train through the soles of their feet. And for years afterward, those instruments listened, patiently, in the silence, and they discovered something that surprised everyone. The moon has moonquakes. They are not like the great, violent earthquakes of our own restless planet, born of shifting continents grinding against one another. The moon has no drifting plates, no churning interior driving its surface into motion. Its quakes are subtler, stranger, and they come from several sources. Some are deep, occurring far below the surface, and they seem to be triggered by the pull of the Earth itself, by the same tidal forces that raise our oceans, gently flexing the body of the moon as it moves closer to us and then farther away along its slightly oval path. Twice a month, roughly, this flexing seems to set off faint tremors deep within, the moon quietly responding to the tug of the world it circles. Others are shallow and sharper, and to this day not fully understood. And there are quakes caused by nothing more than the extreme temperature of the lunar day and night. For the moon's surface swings between blistering heat and brutal cold as the long lunar day gives way to the long lunar night. And this endless expansion and contraction, this heating and cooling of the rock, causes the surface to creak and shift, like the timbers of an old house settling in the changing temperatures of a day. But perhaps the most wonderful thing the seismometers revealed was this. When something struck the moon, or when a spent piece of a spacecraft was deliberately crashed into it as an experiment, the moon did not simply absorb the blow and fall silent. It rang. The vibrations continued for a remarkably long time, echoing and re-echoing through the body of the moon for many minutes, far longer than a similar impact would ring on Earth. The scientists described it memorably as the moon ringing like a bell. The dry, fractured, ancient rock of the moon carries these vibrations in a way our own wet, dense planet does not, and so a single impact sends a long, slow shimmering of sound through the entire body of the moon, a deep and silent chime that no ear could ever hear, ringing on and on through the stone. By listening to how these vibrations traveled through the moon, scientists were able to peer, in a sense, into its hidden interior, the way a doctor might listen to the inside of a body. And they found that the moon, like the Earth, has layers. A crust of the rock we know from the surface, a thick mantle of denser stone below, and at the very center, a small core, part of it solid, part of it perhaps still molten, a tiny warm heart buried deep within the cold gray ball. The moon is small, and it has cooled far more than the Earth over the ages, its inner fires long since dimmed. But they are not entirely gone. Deep down at its very center, there may still be a whisper of the heat of its creation, a faint remaining warmth from that ancient magma ocean, holding on, 4.5 billion years later, in the dark. There is something oddly comforting in that. The moon looks, to our eyes, like the very image of stillness and death, a cold gray stone hanging in the sky. And yet it is not quite as lifeless as it seems. It trembles faintly with the Earth's pull. It creaks in the changing temperatures. It rings like a bell when struck. And somewhere at its heart, it may still hold a small ember of ancient warmth. Even the quietest and stillest of worlds, it turns out, is never entirely at rest. Now let us come down closer still, closer than the craters and the seas, closer even than the trembling core, down to the very surface itself, to the ground you would feel beneath your feet if you could stand upon the moon. For the moon is covered, everywhere, in a strange and ancient dust. If you were to reach down and run your gloved hand across the surface of the moon, you would not touch bare rock. You would touch a layer of fine, powdery gray material that covers nearly the entire world like a soft gray blanket. This layer is called the regolith, and it is one of the moon's most quietly remarkable features. It is the shattered skin of the moon, ground down over billions of years, and it holds its own secrets. The regolith was not laid down by wind or water, for the moon has neither. It was made by impacts, the same impacts that carved the great craters, but on a far smaller scale. Over billions of years, the moon has been struck not only by large objects, but by countless tiny ones. Micrometeorites, some no larger than grains of sand, constantly rain down upon the surface, silent and unending. Each tiny strike shatters a little more rock, breaks it into ever finer fragments, and slowly, over unimaginable stretches of time, this endless gentle bombardment has ground the upper surface of the moon into powder. In places, that powder is only a few meters deep. In others, it may extend down tens of meters before you reach solid rock beneath. The dust itself is unlike anything on Earth. Because it was made by impacts and not by weathering, its grains are sharp and jagged, never smoothed by tumbling in water or blowing in wind. Under a microscope, lunar dust looks like tiny shards of broken glass and stone, angular and abrasive. It clings to everything, drawn by static charge, working its way into every seam and joint. The astronauts who walked upon the moon found that it coated their suits, blackened their gloves, and carried a faint smell once they were back inside their craft and had removed their helmets. They described it as something like gunpowder or spent fireworks, a sharp and metallic scent, the smell of a surface that had never known air or water or life. And that dust, that soft gray blanket, is where the most human part of the moon story is written. For it was into this dust that we, the people of Earth, pressed our footprints. When the astronauts of the Apollo missions stepped down onto the lunar surface, they left their boot prints in that ancient regolith. And because there is no wind to blow the dust away, no rain to wash it smooth, no life to disturb it, those footprints remain there tonight, exactly as they were left more than half a century ago. The prints of the first humans to walk upon another world, preserved in dust that had lain undisturbed for billions of years, and that will now preserve those prints for millions of years more. Perhaps longer than any monument we have ever built upon the earth will endure. Think of that for a moment. On Earth, our footprints vanish almost at once. A wave erases them from the beach. The wind smooths them from the sand. The grass springs back up where we have walked. Nothing we do to the ground stays for very long. But on the moon, the mark of a single human step may outlast entire civilizations. It may still be there, sharp and clear, long after every trace of us has vanished from the earth. The regolith is patient. It keeps what it is given, and it does not let go. The dust holds other memories too. Because the moon has no protective atmosphere and no strong magnetic field to shield it, the surface is constantly exposed to the raw radiation of space and to the steady stream of particles that flow outward from the sun, the solar wind. Over billions of years, that solar wind has become embedded in the grains of the regolith, working its way into the dust and lodging there. In a very real sense, the surface of the moon has been recording the behavior of the sun for eons, holding within its dust a faint archive of ancient sunlight and ancient solar storms. To study lunar dust is, in part, to study the history of the sun itself, written not in fire, but in the quiet accumulation of tiny particles in the gray powder of another world. This slow darkening and altering of the surface by the relentless bombardment of space is sometimes called space weathering, a strange kind of weather that involves no wind and no rain, only the patient, ceaseless working of sunlight and micrometeorites upon the naked stone. And here, in the study of that weathered surface, we come upon one of the moon's most genuine and beautiful mysteries, something we still do not fully understand, even now. For scattered across the moon, in certain places, there are strange, pale, swirling markings, bright, curling patterns, like brushstrokes or wisps of cream stirred into coffee, sprawling across the darker ground. They have no height, no depth. They are not hills or valleys or craters. They are simply patterns of light and dark upon the flat surface, swirls of brighter material curling in graceful, looping shapes across the gray. The most famous of them has a lovely, wandering form and lies upon one of the great dark seas, curling there like a ghostly signature written across the plain. For a long time, no one could explain these swirls at all, and even now the explanation is not entirely settled. But the leading idea is strange and wonderful. In these places, and only in these places, the moon seems to have preserved small patches of magnetism, buried in the rock, remnants perhaps of an ancient time when the moon may have had a magnetic field of its own, now long since faded away everywhere else. And where these little pockets of magnetism remain, they may act like tiny invisible shields, deflecting the solar wind, protecting the surface beneath them from the darkening effect of space weathering. And so, over the ages, the shielded ground stays bright and pale, while all the land around it slowly darkens, and the difference between them traces out these ghostly, swirling shapes. If this is truly the answer, then the lunar swirls are something remarkable indeed. They are the visible shadow of an invisible thing, the delicate imprint of ancient lingering magnetism, painted across the surface of the moon in light and shade, a secret written in a language of brightness, curling silently across the plains, still not entirely deciphered, still holding on to a little of its mystery. There are other faint mysteries too, gentler still. For centuries, observers watching the moon through their telescopes have occasionally reported strange, brief glimmers upon its surface. A momentary brightening, a patch that seems to glow or shimmer for a few seconds, or to grow briefly hazy, and then fades back to normal, leaving the observer to wonder whether they truly saw anything at all. These fleeting events, called transient lunar phenomena, are rare and difficult to study and easy to dismiss. But they have been reported for a very long time by many careful watchers, and some scientists suspect they may be caused by puffs of gas escaping from deep within the moon, small releases from the still settling interior, briefly stirring up dust or catching the light. We do not fully know. The moon, for all that we have studied it, for all that we have walked upon it and gathered its stones and mapped its every crater, still keeps a few of its quiet secrets, and offers them up only rarely, and only to those patient enough to keep watching. But there is one more secret held within the moon's surface, in its coldest and darkest corners, where the sunlight never reaches at all. And it is a secret that has changed the way we think about the moon entirely. For in those frozen shadows, there may be water. At the very poles of the moon, at the top and the bottom, there are places that sunlight has never touched. Not in a billion years. Not ever. These are the permanently shadowed regions, and they are among the coldest places in the entire solar system. Colder even than the distant, frozen surface of Pluto out at the edge of the planets. To understand how such places can exist, you must understand how the moon sits in space. The Earth is tilted, leaning at an angle as it circles the sun, which is why we have our seasons, our long summer days, and our short winter ones. But the moon barely tilts at all. It stands almost perfectly upright as it travels around us, and this means that at its poles, the sun never climbs high into the sky. It only ever skims along the horizon, low and weak and pale, and in certain deep craters near the poles, craters whose high walls block that low, skimming light entirely, the sun's rays never reach the floor at all. Those crater floors lie in a darkness that has been unbroken since the craters first formed, perhaps billions of years ago. A darkness older than any darkness we can imagine, never once broken by a single ray of light. In that eternal darkness, with no sunlight to bring even the faintest warmth, temperatures fall to unimaginable depths, and in such deep and lasting cold, something extraordinary becomes possible. Water, in the form of ice, can survive. Where would water on the moon come from? For a long time, most people assumed the moon was utterly dry, a bone-dry world with no water at all. But over billions of years, comets and certain asteroids, which carry ice within them, have struck the moon. Each impact would have released a puff of water vapor. Most of that vapor would have drifted away, lost to space. For the moon's gravity is too weak to hold on to much of an atmosphere. But some of those wandering water molecules, drifting slowly across the surface, would eventually have found their way into the cold traps of the polar shadows. And once there, in that eternal, brutal cold, they would have frozen and stayed, unable ever to escape. Molecule by molecule, over eons, ice may have quietly accumulated in those dark craters, hidden away from the sun that could never reach it. For decades, this was only a theory, a possibility whispered by scientists, but never confirmed. Then, in more recent years, spacecraft sent to study the moon began to find the evidence. Instruments detected the signatures of hydrogen concentrated at the poles, exactly where the cold traps lie. One mission deliberately crashed a spacecraft into a permanently shadowed crater near the South Pole and studied the plume of debris it threw up. And within that plume, there was water. Frozen water, hidden in the perpetual dark, exactly as had been imagined. This discovery has quietly transformed our relationship with the moon. A world once thought entirely dry turns out to hold reserves of ice, locked away in its coldest corners. And water, on a world like the moon, is precious beyond measure. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, which are the very components of rocket fuel. Water can provide air to breathe and liquid to drink. If human beings ever return to the moon to stay, to build outposts and remain there for long periods, it is toward these frozen polar craters that they will look. Not for their beauty and not for their mystery, but for the simple, essential gift of water in a place where water was never expected to be. But set aside, for a moment, all thought of what the ice might be useful for. Consider instead, simply, what it is. In the darkest, coldest, most forgotten corners of the moon, in craters that have not seen a single ray of sunlight since before the first life stirred on Earth, there is ice. Ancient ice, some of it perhaps delivered by comets that formed at the very edge of the solar system, in the frozen dark beyond the outermost planets. Water that has traveled across unimaginable distances and unimaginable spans of time, only to come to rest at last in the eternal shadows of the moon's poles, frozen and still and utterly undisturbed. There is a strange tenderness in that image, that even here, on this dry and silent world, in its darkest and most hidden places, there is water, waiting, frozen, patient, as though the moon, for all its barrenness, has kept a small and secret store of the very substance that makes our own world so alive, tucked away where nothing could ever take it, holding it safe in the dark against a day that may never come. And that brings us to a deeper truth about the moon, one that we often forget as we gaze up at it as a distant, separate thing. The moon is not truly separate from us. It never has been. The moon and the earth are bound together, and always have been, in ways that reach into the very rhythm of life upon our world. Consider the tides. Twice each day, along the coastlines of the world, the sea rises and falls. It pulls back to reveal the shore, then returns to cover it once more, in a slow and steady breathing that has continued for as long as there have been oceans. This great motion, this endless rise and fall of the waters of the world, is the work of the moon. The moon's gravity reaches across the emptiness of space and gently pulls upon the earth and upon its oceans. On the side of the earth nearest the moon, the water is drawn upward slightly, bulging toward it. On the far side, a second bulge forms as well, for reasons woven into the deeper mechanics of gravity and motion. And as the earth turns beneath these two bulges of raised water, each stretch of coastline passes through them, experiencing the rise and fall we call the tides. The moon, hanging silent and distant in the sky, is reaching down and stirring the oceans of the entire world, not with force or violence, but with the softest and most patient of pulls, drawing the seas up toward itself and then releasing them over and over without pause for billions of years. Those tides have shaped life itself. Along the edges of the sea, in the zone that is covered at high tide and exposed at low, there exists one of the richest and most demanding environments on all the earth, the intertidal zone. Creatures there must survive both underwater and in the open air, twice a day, every day of their lives. Some scientists believe that this very rhythm of the tides, this endless cycle of covering and uncovering, may have played a role in the great transition of life from the sea onto the land, coaxing early creatures to adapt to both worlds, to endure the water and the air by turns. If that is so, then the very presence of life upon the land, the whole green and breathing world of forests and fields and every creature that walks upon it, may owe something to the gentle pull of the moon. The moon does more than move the seas. It also steadies the Earth itself. As our planet spins, it wobbles very slightly, the way a spinning top wobbles as it turns. Left entirely unchecked, that wobble could grow larger over time, causing the Earth's axis to swing more and more wildly, tilting far over and then back again across long ages. Such great swings would bring catastrophic changes in climate, as different parts of the world were thrown into extremes of endless summer and endless winter, of scorching sunlight and frozen dark. But the moon, with its steady gravitational presence, holds the Earth's wobble in gentle check. It acts as a stabilizer, a quiet anchor, keeping our planet's tilt within a narrow and gentle range. And that stability has given the Earth a relatively steady climate over long stretches of time, a steadiness that life has leaned upon and depended upon in order to flourish. So when you look up at the moon tonight, understand that you are not looking at a distant, unrelated thing. You are looking at the companion that steadies your world, that moves your oceans, that has been woven into the story of life on Earth from very near its beginning. The moon is not a stranger in the sky. It is family, bound to the Earth by ties of gravity that have never once loosened in 4.5 billion years. It has been there through everything, holding our world gently steady, keeping the rhythm of the tides, asking for nothing in return. And there is one more thing the moon does, slowly, patiently, that most people never realize. It is stealing time from the Earth, or rather, it is gently slowing us down. The tides, those great risings and fallings of the sea, create a subtle friction as the water sloshes against the ocean floors and the coastlines of the world. That friction acts, ever so slightly, as a brake upon the Earth's rotation. Each day, the Earth turns just a tiny fraction more slowly than the day before. The change is unimaginably small, far too small to notice in a lifetime, or in 100 lifetimes. But over vast spans of time, it adds up. Hundreds of millions of years ago, a day on Earth was noticeably shorter than it is now. Back in the age of the earliest corals, a day may have lasted only around 21 or 22 hours, and a year held many more days than it does today. And remarkably, the corals of that ancient time actually recorded this in their growth, laying down fine daily bands in their skeletons as they grew. By counting those bands and comparing the number of daily bands to the yearly cycles, we can read in the fossils of ancient coral that the days have grown longer, slowly, across the ages, as the moon applies its gentle and unending brake. The moon has been lengthening our days for hundreds of millions of years, and the coral kept the record for us. Without ever knowing, it did. And as the Earth slows, the moon drifts away. By a law woven into the physics of orbits, the energy the Earth loses as it slows is passed to the moon, and the moon responds by moving into a slightly higher, more distant orbit. Every year, the moon retreats from the Earth by a few centimeters, roughly the rate at which your fingernails grow. It is utterly imperceptible in a human lifetime. But over the long ages of the Earth, it is profound. The moon that hangs above you tonight is farther away than it was when the dinosaurs walked beneath it, and it was closer still when it first formed, looming huge and red in the sky of the young Earth. We know this retreat with great precision, and we will soon see how, through a beautiful gift the astronauts left behind. Let your mind rest, for a moment, on that ancient young moon, so very close to the Earth. In those distant ages, the moon was not the small silver coin you see tonight. It was a vast and looming presence, hanging enormous in the sky, many times larger than it appears now, filling a great portion of the heavens. And being so close, its gravitational pull upon the Earth was far, far stronger than it is today. The tides it raised in those early ages were not the gentle risings and fallings we know from our own quiet coastlines. They were titanic. Colossal walls of water, sweeping across the shallow young seas, surging vast distances inland, and then draining away again, twice in each of the Earth's short, fast spinning days. The whole planet turned more quickly then, its days lasting only a handful of hours, whirling beneath that enormous moon. It was a wilder world, a more violent and dramatic one, ruled by a moon that loomed close and pulled hard and stirred the oceans into great heaving motions we can scarcely imagine now. And over billions of patient years, all of that violence has quietened. The moon has drifted slowly outward, growing smaller and calmer in the sky. The Earth's spin has gradually slowed, its days stretching longer and gentler. The titanic tides have eased into the soft, twice-daily breathing of the sea that we know today. What was once wild has become peaceful. What was once close and enormous has become distant and serene. The whole long history of the Earth and the Moon is, in a sense, a story of two worlds slowly settling into calm with one another, letting go of the fury of their youth, easing across the eons into the quiet, steady companionship they share now, tonight, above your head. This means the moon we see is not permanent in its place. It is slowly, endlessly, saying goodbye, not in our lifetimes, and not in the lifetimes of anyone we will ever know. But across the deep future, the moon will continue to drift outward, growing smaller and more distant in the sky. There will come a day, far off in the almost unthinkable future, when the moon will appear too small to fully cover the sun, and the total solar eclipses that we can witness today, that rare and breathtaking alignment where the moon slides perfectly across the face of the sun and turns day briefly into an eerie twilight, will no longer be possible at all. We happen to live in a special moment, a fleeting window in cosmic time, when the moon and the sun appear almost exactly the same size in our sky, allowing those perfect eclipses to occur. It was not always so, and it will not always be. It is simply the gift of our particular age, a coincidence of size and distance that we, of all the generations, happen to be here to enjoy. There is a quiet melancholy in this, but also a kind of gratitude. We live at a moment when the moon is close enough to move our seas, to steady our world, to fill our nights with silver light, and to align, now and then, with the sun in perfect and astonishing harmony. Countless generations before us looked up at very nearly the same moon. Countless generations after us will look up at one that has drifted a little farther. But for now, tonight, it is here. Close, familiar, watching over you as it has watched over every night of your life. Let us stay a while with the surface itself, and with the strange rhythm of light and dark that governs it. For a day on the moon is nothing at all like a day on Earth. On our world, the sun rises and sets each day, giving us our familiar cycle of morning and evening, light and dark, within a single turning of the planet. But the moon turns very slowly, once for each time it circles the Earth, and so a single day on the moon, from one sunrise to the next, lasts about a month of our time. Roughly 2 weeks of unbroken daylight, followed by roughly 2 weeks of unbroken night. Imagine that. A dawn that takes hours to unfold, the sun creeping up over the near horizon with agonizing slowness. Then day, long and relentless, the sun crawling across the black sky so slowly that it barely seems to move at all, for a fortnight without pause. And then, at last, a sunset just as slow, the shadows stretching out endlessly across the gray plains, until the sun sinks below the horizon and the long, cold night begins. And these are extremes beyond anything on Earth. In the long lunar day, With no atmosphere to soften the sun's rays and no wind to carry heat away, the surface grows searingly hot, hot enough to be dangerous to any unshielded thing. Then, in the long lunar night, with nothing to hold in the warmth, the surface plunges to a cold so deep and so severe that it is difficult even to describe. From furnace to freezer, and back again, over and over, every single month, for 4.5 billion years. This is the endless, brutal rhythm that has been baking and freezing the surface of the moon, cracking its stones and grinding its dust, since long before there was anyone to feel it. And through it all, the silence. This may be the strangest thing of all about the moon, and the hardest for us to truly imagine. It is utterly, completely silent. On Earth, there is always sound, even in the quietest place you can find. In the stillest room in the deepest part of the night, there is the faint sound of your own breathing, the whisper of air, the distant murmur of the living world. Sound needs air to travel through, and the moon has almost none. And so upon the moon, there is a silence more total than any silence you have ever known, or ever could know. If you stood there and shouted, no one beside you would hear it through the vacuum. If a great boulder tumbled down a crater wall right in front of you, it would fall in perfect, absolute silence. The moon is a world without sound, a place of pure, unbroken stillness, where the only voices that have ever spoken were carried inside the sealed helmets and radios of the few travelers who came, and where, the moment they left, the great silence closed over everything once again, as it had been for billions of years, and as it will be for billions more. There is something almost holy in that silence, when you sit with it. A quiet so deep and so ancient that it seems to belong to a different order of things entirely. As you lie here now, in the gentle hush of your own night, perhaps you can feel a distant kinship with it. The moon has been holding the deepest silence in all the sky, patiently, faithfully, since long before the first living thing drew breath. And it holds it still, tonight, above you, as you begin to let go of the day. Now, before we speak of the ones who truly went there, let us take a slow and gentle journey of our own, in the mind's eye, across that gray and silent surface. You do not need to move. You do not need to do anything at all. Simply let your imagination drift downward, softly, out of the black sky, until you are standing there, upon the moon, in the great stillness, with all the time in the world and nowhere at all that you need to be. Let us begin high in the bright highlands, on the pale ancient crust that cooled from the magma ocean more than 4 billion years ago. The ground here is rolling and soft in its shapes, worn down over the eons by the endless faint rain of tiny impacts, so that the hills are gentle and rounded, like the smooth shoulders of very old mountains. Everything is gray, but not a single flat gray. As your eyes adjust, you begin to see the subtle shades within it. Pale, chalky grays in the highland dust, darker, dusky grays where the shadows gather, the faint brown gray of stone that has been baking in the sunlight for an age. It is a quiet palette, but it is not empty. It rewards a patient eye. The sun hangs low, off to one side, for it is early in the long lunar morning, and because the sun sits so low, every stone and every ridge throws a long, sharp shadow across the ground. The shadows here are unlike any on Earth. They are utterly black, with no softness at their edges, for there is no air to scatter light into them. A rock might be brilliantly lit on one side, and pure inky darkness on the other, with a knife-clean line between the two. The whole landscape is drawn in this stark language of bright light and black shadow, sharp and clear and strange. Let us walk, slowly, down out of the highlands, toward the edge of one of the great dark seas. And as you walk, notice how you move. On the moon, you weigh only a sixth of what you weigh on Earth, and so each step carries you further and higher than you expect. A slow, floating, loping bound, drifting up and settling gently back down, unhurried, dreamlike. There is no rush to any of it. The dust puffs up softly around your feet with each step and falls straight back down in perfect silence, never swirling, never drifting, for there is no breath of air to carry it. It settles exactly where it falls, as it has always done. Ahead, the pale highlands give way to the dark plain of the mare, the frozen sea of ancient lava. The boundary between them is clear, a shoreline of stone, where the bright old crust meets the dark smooth flood that once welled up and filled the basin. You cross onto the mare, and now the ground beneath you is darker, flatter, more level, stretching away toward a horizon that is startlingly close, curving away far sooner than any horizon on Earth, because this is a small world, and its surface bends sharply beneath your feet. You could almost believe you were standing on the top of a great dark dome, with the ground falling away in every direction. Out here on the open plain, let us simply stop for a while and look up. Above you is the blackest sky you have ever seen. Not the deep blue black of a clear night on Earth, but a true, absolute black, for there is no atmosphere to catch and scatter any light. And scattered across that black are the stars, more of them than you have ever seen, and they do not twinkle. On Earth, the stars shimmer and dance, because their light must pass through our restless air. Here, with no air at all, they shine perfectly steady, hard and clear and still, like grains of light set into black glass. And there, if you are standing on the near side, hangs the Earth. It does not move across the sky the way the moon moves across ours, because the moon always keeps the same face turned toward the Earth. The Earth hangs nearly fixed in the lunar sky, always in the same place, gently swaying only a little with the slow rocking of libration. From any given spot on the near side, the Earth simply hangs there, day after day, night after night, in the same patch of black sky, turning slowly upon itself, showing its oceans and its swirling white clouds and its brown and green lands, waxing and waning through its own phases as the sun moves. It is the most beautiful thing in all that sky, the only blue in a universe of gray and black and white. And it never sets. It is always there, watching over you as you walk. But if you were to journey to the far side, over the curve of the moon and around to the hidden hemisphere, the Earth would slip below the horizon and vanish entirely. And there, standing on the far side, you would be truly alone, in a way no one on Earth can ever be. No blue world in the sky, no home hanging above you, only the black and the steady stars, and the gray ground and the silence. It is perhaps the most isolated place a person could ever stand, cut off even from the sight of the Earth, with the whole body of the moon between you and everyone you have ever known. There is a loneliness to it, but also a strange purity. To stand where the Earth cannot be seen, and to be, for that moment, entirely beyond the reach of home. Let us come back, though, to the near side, where the Earth watches over us, and let us continue our slow walk. Ahead, rising gently from the plain, is the low, curving wall of a crater. Let us climb it, in slow floating steps, up the gentle outer slope, until we stand upon its rim. And from here, we can look down into the bowl. The crater is old, and its walls have softened over the ages, slumping gently inward, worn down by that same faint, endless rain of tiny impacts. At its center, a low peak rises, the frozen rebound of the ancient blow that carved this place. a small mountain born in a single instant of violence unimaginably long ago, and utterly still ever since. The floor of the crater is smooth and shadowed on one side where the low sun cannot reach, and there, in the deepest shadow, the cold is beyond anything you could imagine. But here on the rim, in the sunlight, you simply stand, looking down into a bowl of stone that has waited, unchanged, since a time before there was life upon the earth. Let us walk on, along the rim, and then down the far side, and out across the plain again, until we come to one of the winding channels, the rills, that curl across the mare. This one was carved by a river of lava long ago, when the seas of stone were still molten and flowing. It snakes across the plain in a long, sinuous curve, a shallow valley with gently sloping sides, the dry bed of a stream that ran not with water, but with liquid rock. You could walk along the bottom of it, following its ancient meanders, tracing the path that the molten stone once took as it flowed and cooled and finally fell still. Everything here speaks of motion, of flowing and welling and spreading, and yet everything is frozen now, held in perfect stillness. A landscape of movement that has not moved in 3 billion years. And so we could go on, you and I, wandering slowly across this gray world, from plain to crater to mountain to valley, in no hurry, with no destination, simply moving through the great silence, watched over by the blue earth in the black sky, kicking up little puffs of ancient dust that settle straight back down behind us. There is a deep peace in it, a stillness that asks nothing of you. No sound, no wind, no rush, no worry, only the slow floating steps and the sharp black shadows and the endless quiet and the soft gray ground stretching away to that near and gentle horizon. You could lie down here, if you wished, upon the dust that no living thing had ever touched, and look up at the steady stars and the watching earth, and simply rest. Nothing here would disturb you. Nothing here has moved in an age. The moon has been holding this stillness, this deep and perfect peace, longer than there have been dreams to dream it. And for these few quiet moments, in the mind's eye, it is holding it for you. Let us stay a little while longer in that stillness, and then, gently, let us return and speak of the ones who truly walked here. For our imagined journey is a soft and lovely thing, but there were those who made it real. Let us return, then, to that brief and extraordinary chapter of the moon's long history in which we ourselves played a part. For in all the billions of years of the moon's existence, in all that time of silence and stillness, there came one short and shining moment when creatures from another world arrived and walked and touched the ancient dust with their own hands. It happened within living memory, or close to it. Between the years 1969 and 1972, a small number of human beings traveled across the emptiness of space, descended toward that gray and cratered surface, and stepped down onto the moon. 12 people in all. 12 out of all the billions who have ever lived, who have stood upon another world and looked back at the earth hanging small and blue in a black and airless sky. Try to imagine what that must have been like. To stand upon the surface of the moon, in a place where no living thing had ever stood, in a silence so complete that the only sounds were those carried within your own suit, your breathing, your heartbeat, the soft crackle of a voice across the radio. To feel the strange lightness of a world where you weigh only a fraction of what you weigh on Earth, where a gentle push sends you drifting slowly upward, where the dust you kick rises in lazy, graceful arcs and falls back without the swirl that air would give it, settling in perfect silence. To look down at the ancient gray powder and know that no wind had ever stirred it, that your single boot print would be the first mark upon it in the entire history of the world, and then to look up and see the earth, not as a place beneath your feet, but as a small blue and white sphere hanging in the darkness, holding everyone you had ever known, everyone who had ever lived. All of human history and hope and sorrow contained in that single fragile point of light, small enough to hide behind your outstretched thumb. The astronauts who went to the moon carried instruments and cameras, and they gathered rocks and dust to bring home. Samples of the moon itself that scientists still study to this day, more than half a century later. Those rocks have told us much of what we now know about the moon's origin and history, about the magma ocean and the ancient impacts and the ages of the lava seas. Much of the very story we have traveled through tonight was learned, in part, from the stones that those few travelers carried back across space in their small and fragile craft. They drove a small electric vehicle across the surface on the later missions, a lunar rover, bouncing gently across the gray plains, leaving long twin tracks in the dust that are still there now. They climbed the slopes of ancient mountains and stood at the edges of deep valleys and gathered up whatever the moon would give them. But they left things behind too. They left the flags they planted, though those flags have long since been bleached pale and white by the harsh, unfiltered sunlight. They left the lower halves of their landing craft, the platforms from which they launched themselves back up toward home. They left scientific instruments, some of which, like the seismometers we spoke of, kept faithfully sending back their data for years afterward, listening to the moon in the silence long after the people had gone. And in one quiet and beautiful gesture, they left mirrors, special reflectors, carefully placed upon the surface, designed to bounce light back exactly the way it came. Even now, more than half a century later, scientists on Earth can fire a beam of laser light up at those mirrors and measure the faint reflection that returns, and in doing so, measure the distance to the moon with astonishing, breathtaking precision, down to a matter of centimeters across all that vast gulf of space. It is through those mirrors, left by human hands on the lunar surface, that we have measured the moon's slow retreat, its few centimeters of drift each year. The travelers left us a way to keep listening to the moon, to keep speaking with it in a language of light, long after they themselves had returned home and grown old. Every time that laser is fired and the answering glimmer returns, it is as though the moon is quietly confirming, once more, across the decades, that yes, we were there, and yes, we touched it, and here is the proof, still shining faintly back at you across the dark. And of course, they left their footprints. Those prints in the ancient dust, which we spoke of before, and which remain there still tonight, undisturbed, perfect, waiting in the silence. If you could travel there now, to the Sea of Tranquility, and walk to the place where the first of them stepped down, you would find that first footprint exactly as it was made in the summer of 1969. The dust holds it still. The moon, ever the patient keeper of memory, has kept this too, a small, human mark pressed into the surface of a world that is older than life itself, and cradled there, safe, in the great stillness. There is something almost unbearably moving in the smallness of it. 12 people, a mere handful of visits, a few short days spent upon a world that has existed for 4.5 billion years. In the vast sweep of the moon's history, our presence there was briefer than a single breath, briefer than the blink of an eye. And yet, it happened. For a few short years, this ancient, silent, empty world knew the touch of living beings, heard the sound of human voices carried in sealed helmets, felt the press of human feet upon its dust. And then we left, and the silence returned, and the moon went back to its long and patient stillness, as though we had never come at all. Except for the footprints, except for the mirrors, except for the flags and the fallen craft and the quiet instruments. except for the memory it will hold, silently, for millions of years to come. Since those years, no human being has returned to the moon. For a long time, it was left alone once more, visited only by robotic spacecraft, mapped from orbit, studied patiently from afar. But in recent years, the world's attention has begun to turn back toward it. New spacecraft from many nations have traveled to the moon. Some have landed softly, some have crashed, some have carried small rovers to trundle slowly across the surface, sending back new images of that gray and ancient ground. There is talk, once more, of sending people, of building outposts, of returning to those frozen polar craters and their hidden stores of ice. The moon, which we left in silence half a century ago, may yet hear human voices again in the years to come. But whatever we do, whatever we build there, the moon will remain far larger and far older than any of our ambitions. We may return and walk again and leave new prints beside the old ones. We may build shelters and dig for ice and gaze once more at the earth from that gray and distant shore. But we will always be visitors, brief guests upon a world that measures its life in billions of years, and that will keep its slow, still vigil long, long after we are gone. And that, perhaps, is the deepest secret of the moon. Not any single fact about its craters, or its seas, or its hidden face. Not the swirls, or the ice, or the ringing of its ancient stone. But the simple, overwhelming truth of its endurance. The moon is old, almost beyond understanding. It has watched the entire history of life on Earth unfold beneath it, from the first faint stirrings in the ancient seas, through the long ages of strange and vanished creatures, through the rise of the forests and the coming of the great beasts, through the whole span of human time, the rise and fall of every civilization that has ever built a temple, or told a story, or sung a song beneath its light. It was there before any of it. It will be there after all of it. And through all those countless nights, it has done nothing but hang in the sky, silver and silent, turning its familiar face toward us, keeping its memories, holding its stillness. Every person who has ever lived has looked up and seen very nearly the same moon that you can see tonight, the same seas, the same craters, the same soft gray glow. Across every language, every culture, every age, human beings have gazed upon that single shared companion in the dark, and wondered and dreamed. The moon has been a calendar, a clock, a guide, a comfort, a mystery. It has been called by 1,000 different names and woven into countless stories and songs and prayers. Children have been told that it is made of cheese, and lovers have promised each other its light, and grieving people have looked to it for solace in the dark. And in all that time, it has asked nothing of us, and given us, freely, the quiet gift of its light, night after night after night, without fail. Let us think, gently, for a moment, about how the moon's own story will end, far, far in the future. For it is bound, as it always has been, to the earth and to the sun. Across billions of years yet to come, the moon will continue its slow retreat, drifting farther and farther from the earth, and the days of the earth will continue to lengthen, so slowly, until at last, in a future almost too distant to imagine, the earth and the moon may settle into an even deeper harmony with one another. And far beyond even that, the sun itself will one day change, swelling and brightening in its old age, reshaping this whole quiet corner of the cosmos. But all of that lies unimaginably far ahead, further than the mind can truly reach, in an age none of us, and none of our descendants for countless generations, will ever see. For now, and for all the time that matters to us, the moon will simply go on as it always has. rising and setting, waxing and waning, turning its old gray face toward us in the dark, faithful and unchanging, the steady companion of our nights. And what a companion it has been to our small and restless species across all the long ages of our story. Think of how far back it reaches, this relationship between the human heart and the moon. Long before there were cities, long before there was writing, before there were even words as we would know them, our distant ancestors sat around their fires beneath the open sky and watched the moon move through its phases, and surely they wondered at it, as you have wondered at it, as every person who has ever lived has wondered. It was there in the very first nights of human awareness. It has been there ever since. The moon gave us our first calendar. Before we understood the long, slow year, before we tracked the wandering sun, we counted time by the moon, watching it swell to full and dwindle to nothing, and return, marking off the months of our lives by its faithful turning. Some of the oldest markings ever made by human hands, scratched into bone and stone tens of thousands of years ago, are thought by some to be tallies of the phases of the moon, patient counts of its comings and goings, kept by people whose names and faces are lost to us entirely, but who looked up at the very same moon you can see tonight and felt moved to record its rhythm. In that sense, the moon may have given us one of our first great ideas. The idea of counting, the idea of keeping track of time, the idea that the movements of the sky could be watched and understood and used to order the days of a human life. And beyond the counting of time, the moon gave us something harder to name. It gave us a place to put our wonder. Every culture across the earth, in every age, has looked up at the moon and told stories about it. Some saw a face there, gazing back down. Some saw a rabbit, or a hare, or a toad, in the patterns of its dark seas. Some imagined gods and goddesses who rode across the night sky, or who were the moon itself. Some saw in it the home of the dead, or a lantern lighting the way to the next world, or a mirror in which the sorrows of the earth were softly reflected. Lovers have gazed at it together, and lovers parted by great distances have taken comfort in knowing that the same moon shone on both of them at once, a single shared light bridging any gulf between them. Sailors far out on dark and frightening seas steered by it. Travelers on lonely roads were grateful for its light. Poets in every language have reached for it, again and again, as the very image of beauty, of longing, of the tender melancholy of the night. There is something profound in this, when you consider it. The moon has been, for the whole of human history, a shared companion of the entire species. Whatever divided people, whatever languages they spoke, or beliefs they held, or lands they lived upon, they all looked up at the same moon. It shone equally upon everyone. It belonged to no one and to all. In a world so often broken into pieces, the moon has been one of the very few things that every human being who has ever lived has held in common. A single silver light hanging over all of us, over every roof and every field and every sleeping child, night after night, for as long as there have been human eyes to see it. And it asks nothing of us. It never has. It simply rises and shines and offers its quiet light freely to whoever cares to look, to the joyful and the grieving alike, to the wakeful and the sleeping, to kings and to beggars, to the ancient dead and to you tonight, lying here in the dark at the end of your own long day. The same moon, the same gentle silver light, the same faithful, patient presence that has watched over every human night that has ever been. As we drift now toward the end of our journey together, let us simply rest with all of it. The idea that above you, right now, beyond the ceiling and the roof and the clouds, that ancient gray world is turning slowly through the dark, exactly as it has for 4.5 billion years. Its seas of frozen lava lying still, its craters holding the memory of an ancient storm of stone, its poles cradling secret ice in eternal shadow, its hidden face turned forever away, keeping its own quiet counsel, its pale swirls curling across the plains, tracing out an invisible magnetism no eye can see. And upon its near side, in the dust of the sea of tranquility, a handful of small footprints, waiting patiently in the silence, the mark of the brief and wondrous moment when we reached across the void and touched it. You do not need to remember any of it. You do not need to hold on to a single fact or figure, a single name or number. Let it all soften now, and blur, and settle gently into the quiet. Let the craters and the seas and the ancient dust drift together into a single soft gray stillness. Let the numbers fade. Let the words grow distant and dim. There is nothing left to do tonight but rest. The moon will keep its vigil whether you are awake or asleep. It has done so for longer than there has been anyone at all to watch it, and it will go on doing so far into a future none of us will ever see. It does not need your attention to continue its slow and steady turning. It asks only, perhaps, that now and then you look up and remember that it is there. Patient, ancient, silver in the dark, a quiet companion that has never once left the sky, and never will for as long as you shall live. So let your eyes close now, if they have not already. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let the weight of the whole long day sink away, out of your shoulders, out of your thoughts, down into the mattress, into the dark, into the great soft quiet that is settling all around you. You are here, and you are safe, and above you the old moon turns, keeping watch, keeping its long and gentle silence, just as it has kept watch over every sleeping soul that has ever lived. Thank you for traveling with me tonight across that gray and secret world, through its fire and its stillness, its scars and its hidden ice, its ancient dust and its patient, unbroken silence. If you found some measure of peace here, then this small, quiet corner has done what it set out to do. Rest now, let go, sleep well, and may the light of that ancient moon, wherever you are, whatever the temperature outside your window, watch softly over you until morning. Good night.